So as Melissa mentioned, of course this will be recorded, so if you guys ever want to come back and review this, or if you ever forget my email or anything and you want to come back and ask me some questions, feel free to pull this back up and just take note of my email address and my blog there. I'll put some of the questions, I usually try to put some of the questions on my blog if I don't get a chance to email people directly, but if I don't have time to answer your question, I generally will first email you directly with responses to that. So be sure to go out there and check out the blog there as well, and I'll put the link up for the recording as soon as the webinar is done. So today we're going to be talking about combining Azure and business intelligence. So there's some limited capabilities for Azure up there in the cloud currently, and there's obviously hopefully going to be some expansion to that in the future. But we're going to see what we can come up with today in order to hopefully answer some of the questions you guys have and demystify that integration a little bit. Okay. So before we get started here, like I said, there's my contact information if anybody would like to take that down. Again, feel free to email me or hit me up on Twitter there if you have any questions about any of this stuff today. Okay, so like I said, just a little bit about myself before we get rolling here. I am a consultant and a trainer for Pragmatic Works. I'm based out of Jacksonville, Florida, where most of our consulting staff is. We've got a bunch of people on the road and other places in the country as well. I often blog over at our bidn.com site, and like I said, as well as on my blog. I cross-post all of them there as SQL Server Central. I worked on a SharePoint BI book about a year and a half, 2 years ago now. So if you're ever curious about SharePoint BI, I do a lot of that stuff. We've got a lot of webinars on that topic there as well. And then I do a lot of these kind of speaking events. So I'll actually be at PASS this year as well, talking about SharePoint and SQL, SharePoint 2013 and SQL 2012. So if you guys are going to be in Charlotte this year for PASS, I'll look forward to hopefully meeting some of you guys there as well. All right, so enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about Azure and business intelligence here. So the agenda that we're going to have for today, we're going to take a little bit of a look into the Azure Management Portal, so where you're going to actually go in order to manage all of these different BI, some of this BI functionality as well as some database functionality. So the other thing that we're going to do here is we're actually going to take a look at some of the database services, because I'm not an Azure licensing expert by any means here, but there's a lot of information out there about how you get charged for some of this stuff, whether it's data that gets transferred inside of the data centers or being moved in and out of the cloud, so basically from on-prem into your database, as well as from the database back down to on-prem. So that's where a lot of that stuff is going to be managed, and like I said, we'll take a look at the databases in there as well, and we'll actually do a little bit of work with one of the Azure databases here today as well. So we all know that you can't just magically, sorry about that, you can't just magically get data into the cloud. You got to have a way to put it there, and so we're going to talk about the main Microsoft tool for integrating into all your data transfer is going to be SSIS. So we're going to talk about how to actually get some data into our Azure database using SSIS. Once we've got the data there, we're actually going to go on, we're going to create a reporting services report. So I'll show you guys how to actually get reporting working inside of Azure, and then how to actually create some reports. There's some really good stuff built in. There's a couple of really good resources on MSDN out there for how to get started with that as well. And then finally, we'll take a look at the Azure Data Market. So if you guys do any kind of Power Pivot, it's a really great place to be able to pull in some data. Okay. So first things first here, let's talk about the management portal just a little bit. So all of your Azure stuff is managed via subscriptions. So you log in with your Windows ID, so your email address and password that's associated with what was the live IDs. Inside of there, you can do all kinds of stuff. It's limited inside of Azure at this point to just databases. They've done a lot of work over the last couple of years, really building out that infrastructure there. So you have the option to do things not only larger databases than you used to be able to do before, but now you can also host virtual machines. You can host reporting services in there in Azure, which we're going to look at today. There's storage that you can add additional storage to those VMs, or just store blob storage up there. You can create FTPs based on the Azure infrastructure there. So all kinds of stuff that you can do, and now they're even making big strides into some more of the authentication methods in order to kind of sync that with what you have in your on-prem locations. So there's a lot of stuff inside of Azure now. It's not just for little tiny databases like it used to be a long time ago. And then the other thing that we're going to use that management portal there for mainly is going to be to monitor the usage. So, you know, cost is a really big thing, and with the way the economy has been, you know, everybody's looking to make sure that they're not spending way too much money on anything. So you're going to be able to go in there, monitor your usage, because everything in Azure is done based on data movement and transactions and how much storage you're using. So there's a lot of tools built in there to monitor that. So we'll take a look at just the highlights of some of that stuff. We're not going to go into detail about the management portal, but just be aware of that's really where you go to keep track of all your different Azure subscriptions. We are going to look at the databases, like I said, just briefly today. I'll actually show you guys a really good free resource that you can use to get started yourself. The current databases will go up to 150 gigs is the current maximum size. There's ways that you can work around that to get some additional data up there, but the current maximum size of a database is at 150 gigs. You can connect using the normal tools that you would use in your everyday SQL Server experience. So just connecting up with SQL Server Management Studio. I'm actually going to show you guys how to connect through SQL Server Data Tools today using Visual Studio. And it's basically the same exact process. So we'll talk a little bit about that whenever we get into the database side. Now again, all the stuff is managed online. There's a couple of different ways that you can manage this. You can either, in addition to just the monitoring of your instance, you can go and create tables online, or you can create them inside of Management Studio. You can create views online, or you can create them in Management Studio. You can run queries both online and in Management Studio. So a lot of the things that you can do in your normal SQL environment today using just those familiar tools, you can also do up in the Azure portal as well. The nice thing about Azure in general is there's built-in high availability. So you can you know, they've got data centers all over the world and things. If you choose the options to, you can have geographic redundancy inside of there. You know, they're really built to provide you that seamless experience and allow you to take some of the management responsibilities away from you, and they really take care of that high availability for you. And the other thing that's really key about it, like I said, is it's easy to manage. So you don't have to worry about a lot of the maintenance pieces that you would normally do inside of your on-prem versions of SQL. So nice tools available for you there. So without talking too much more here, we'll go ahead and we'll take a look. Like I said, we'll log you into that management portal, and then we're also going to go over and I'll show you guys the SQL Server databases, and we'll get rolling on some of this here today. So I'm going to open up a browser here and go over to my Azure portal here. Once you go to windowsazure.com, you can click on the account or go to portal here. We're going to go into the portal. I'm going to log in here with my Windows credentials. And then you'll notice that this whole screen here is in Silverlight. So you do have to have some Silverlight plugins installed in order to manage some of this. But the first thing that you notice when you log in is you get a list of all your subscriptions. So I've set up on just a 3-month free trial. So if you go out to Azure, you actually get a little bit of a free trial to get yourself started. And I've got a trial out there for both the database and the reporting services that we're going to look at today. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll take a look at these databases, and then we'll roll into reporting services. So I can either click on my subscription here, or if I go over here onto the left-hand side, I can click on SQL databases and then go into my subscription from this point here. So if I click on my Azure database, I get this nifty little welcome screen. So the other thing that you notice, I mentioned there were a lot of different services that we have inside of Azure, and those are all these different things over here. So we've got our databases, we've got our storage, we've got the reporting services here. Then we've got some other mobile services as well as those VMs, and you can host websites, all kinds of different stuff. And the nice thing about this too is that all these pieces, they all integrate together. So what you'll see here is, even though I have 2 different subscriptions for my reporting services and my database, I can actually use this database inside my reporting services report. Okay, so this is the little welcome page here. You can check the box here to make this hide every time that you open it, but there's some good information both on this main page as well as the reporting services main page. So when we come here, we can do things like getting the SQL Server data tools, which I'm going to go ahead and launch Visual Studio here and let that load up in the background because we're going to need that here in a minute. Like I said, you can use the regular SQL Server Management Studio on this particular machine. We're gonna take a look at doing this through Visual Studio. Okay. The other thing that we can do here is there's some Visual Studio projects. You can download those here. You'll also notice that here's my server name. So this is actually what normally when you would go to connect to a SQL server, you would type in, whatever your server name happens to be. So FL-SQL. So it's my SQL server that's in Florida would be potentially the meaning behind that name. Here we're going to need to take this server name and paste that into our server location. So I'll show you where you can get this here as well. So if we go over to our dashboard, if I was to hide that first screen, the dashboard would be the first thing that comes up. So on my dashboard here, you'll notice that I've actually got that same server name is right down here in the bottom right. So you don't have to worry about not being able to get back to that. It's always going to be available there for you. Okay, so on this page we've got some different monitoring tools. You'll notice that it shows me the number of connections here. I can come over to my monitor tab and get a little bit better information. So I've got some successful connections, failed connections, deadlocks. There's some additional monitoring pieces that you can build in by doing this little add metrics down here, but those will all show up here on this main page. And then finally this little scale tab. Currently, I'm just using the little free, on my free trial here, I've just got the 1 gig web edition. You can go up to 5 gigs here. If you switch it over to business, then, of course, like I mentioned, you can go up to 150 gigabytes worth of space in that database there. Okay, so I don't need to mess with any of my changes or anything there. So the next thing that we're going to do here is click on this Manage button. So I've got my particular database highlighted, and then I'm going to go to Manage, and I'll say that I'm going to include that IP address rule. Okay. And then you'll notice that I get another little screen that pops up here, and then I have to actually log into my database. So this is not my same Windows Live ID or my Windows ID that I logged in with. This is a user account that you set up whenever you create the database. So I'm just going to log into here real quick. And then this is the little portal page that comes up whenever you go into the Manage. So this is a lot of I mentioned that some of the administration can be done from here inside of the management portal, and then some of it can be done inside of data tools. So I can come over here and things like look at my query performance. And I can come over here and I can click on one of these queries, similar to what you would do inside of Management Studio. I can see all kinds of different statistics about it down here at the bottom. And then I can also click on this query plan and analyze what actually happened inside of my query by looking at this query plan. So you do get a lot of the tools that are available to you inside of Management Studio right here inside of the Azure portal. The other thing that we can do is this Design tab down here in the bottom left. If I click on this, you'll notice that I get a list of all my tables. So I can add and remove tables here, much like I would go into Management Studio and type Create Table or Drop Table. I can also go in, and if I click on the Edit button here, you notice that I get a list of all my columns. I can add and remove columns again. I've got some index management over here, and then some data management stuff over here on this side. So one of the key things, and I'll mention this again whenever we get over to integration services, is that you do have to, in order to add data, you do have to have a minimum of a clustered index on your table. If you don't put a clustered index on the table, you get a little warning that pops up and says, hey, you need to add a clustered index to your table in order to write data to it. Okay, so a lot of little management things here that we can do right inside of the Azure portal here. If we click on New Query up here at the top, again, I get a little query window, and I can do select star from sales territory, and I can click on Run, and there it brings up my results. So again, a lot of the same stuff that you would normally see inside of Management Studio. So we're going to open up Visual Studio over here, and I'm going to go to my SQL Server Object Explorer and show you guys real quick how to actually log into this. So it's a little bit different logging into an Azure database than it is a regular SQL server. So I'm going to do add SQL server. I'm going to put my server name in here. I'm going to put the user ID and password, and we don't have time to go into management of all the user IDs and everything, but you can manage users on an individual basis inside the Azure portal there. And then you always need to make sure that you specify the database that you want to connect to. So I'm going to actually connect to Azure Database. If we flip back over here, you can see that's the name of my database here. It's just Azure Database. Now when I click Connect, if we give this just a second here, it's actually going to connect up to my Azure portal, and it's going to bring up the Object Explorer over here inside of my SQL Server Object Explorer. One of the really cool free resources that I mentioned was SQL Server Central, Azure. So SQL Server Central actually, SQL Server Central actually hosts a copy of the Adventureworks Database out there on their Azure account for everybody to be able to go out and connect to. And for some reason, that's not letting me connect up right now. Not 100% sure why. Let's see if we can expand the one that I've already got here. Hopefully there's not a firewall rule or something here at my client side that's going to prevent me from connecting. That would be pretty terrible. So Azure on Adventureworks here. So let me see if I can find create a page at SQL Server Central. So there's this page, and I'll put this out on the blog for everybody to be able to go to. But there's actually this Azure database that you can connect to that has the entire Adventureworks data set on it. So they're going to host that. There's a little table out there that you can actually go into and put your username and password, or put your name and then your Twitter ID, and then you can leave them a little note in there as well. Okay. See if it'll actually connect here for me. If not, that's really going to screw up some demos here. So hopefully there's not actually a firewall rule here on this network that's going to prevent this. If not, I'll talk through some of these items for you guys, and then we'll see if we can just get a report uploaded into the Azure market here. So like I said, they do host a couple of different databases. They've got the Adventureworks database out there, the Northwinds database, and the Pubs database. Those are all out there on their Azure market. So if you guys ever want to go out there and play around with that stuff and try to do some work with that, then you can do that there. So, well, it doesn't look like that's going to load. So we're going to try to move on to some reporting services stuff here and see if we can get it to load. So we'll hop over to reporting services. If not, what I can do is I'll actually record some of these demos offline, and then bring them out, put them on my blog so that you guys can actually see a walkthrough of some of these demos that I would have done for you today. So back over here in the Azure Management Portal, that's really all I wanted to show you guys with the databases. Again, make sure the key takeaway here is this is your server name that you want to put in whenever you're trying to connect, and then your users and passwords you manage all your users in here as well. Okay, so we're going to go over to our SQL reporting. Whenever we click on the subscription that we need here, we get a very similar screen that we saw before. There's some references here, so we can install Report Builder in order to build some reports out here, or we can install SQL Server Data Tools, which we'll take a look at hopefully both of those here in just a moment. Something to make note of over here on the main reporting services page is I actually do, much like in reporting services in the on-prem version, you do get the same reporting services URL. So I'm going to open this up over here in a new window, and you'll see it's much like you would do on your reporting services server. You just type in /report server at the end of the URL there, and I can log in. I've got my same username and password for my database over here, and I currently don't have anything deployed out here. Otherwise, you would see a list of reports. So hopefully we're going to get a report deployed out here, and we'll show you actually how this is going to work. So back inside of here, I mentioned there was a couple of tools that we have in order to do some management here. We can install data tools and we can install Report Builder. The other thing that we can do over here is manage our users. So much like on our database side, you can actually come in here and add multiple users, so not everybody has to be a content manager. You can give some people only read access and other people access to modify reports. You can do all kinds of, a lot of the same report permission options that you have in the on-prem version, you actually have right here inside the Azure portal as well. The other thing that we have over here is items. And this is the management piece for creating different items inside of the Azure Reporting Services portal. So there's only a couple of things that we can do here. You only get to create a folder, upload a report, or create a data source. So those are really the only three options that we have in order to build things inside of the Azure portal. So what we're going to do today is we're going to actually connect this up with Report Builder, and we're going to show you how to use Report Builder in order for your end users to hopefully create some reporting services reports. And then I'll even show you some of the settings inside of Management Studio over here to get a report created. So what I'm going to try to do here, let me see if I'm going to be able to connect to something real quick. Because what I actually want to do is show you guys how to get some data over there for reporting services to be able to use some data. Let me see if this is going to let us do this. So if we want to do a new connection out to our Azure portal, all we have to do is create a new ODBC connection. So we'll click on there. I've got a couple of connections already created inside of here. The top one here is the one to my Azure portal. So let me see if this is going to allow us to connect here, and then we'll figure out if we're going to be able to create an SSIS package or not. So once you get a connection manager created to your Azure portal, from that point everything in SSIS really works the exact same way that it does if you're connecting to two on-prem versions of SQL Server. So there's no additional authentication. It's Windows authentication or SQL authentication for me to be able to connect up to that database. But outside of that, all of my transforms and everything are the exact same. So you notice it has a little red down arrow there, so it's not actually going to let me connect to that. So we'll bypass that particular functionality for today. So long and the short of this whole demo here, though, is you can pull data out of Azure, you can push data back into Azure, you can move it both ways. The only thing that you need to really be careful of here is whenever you move data in and out of these data centers between Azure and on-prem or Azure and some flat files somewhere else on the web or something like that, is you do incur some data costs. So just be mindful of how you use integration services to push data into Azure and pull data out of the Azure portal there. There currently is no SSIS for Azure. So if we hop back over here to the slides, I've got a couple of little notes here for you guys. On the SSIS side, there's no Azure inside of SSIS inside of Azure currently. There's also no analysis services inside of Azure. I would imagine that both of those things are probably at some point going to change. Obviously, there would be some limited capabilities with each of those, much like we have with reporting services, which I'll show you guys a couple of those things here real quick. But there isn't currently any SSIS built into the Azure platform, so you would currently need to run that in an on-prem version of integration services. You saw there, it is pretty easy to connect. Hopefully, you guys get the gist of that. Essentially, it's just like connecting to a normal SQL server. Username, password. Just make sure you specify the default catalog or that initial database. And then, of course, beware of those costs because you do end up paying for transfer of data in and out of the data center. So again, you can import, you can export. The thing to keep in mind when you start importing data into the Azure databases there, again, make sure that you have that make sure you have that clustered index on your table. Otherwise, you will get an error that says it cannot write data to the table. So always be sure to have that onto there. Okay. SQL reporting. I showed you guys a little bit of the portal there. Hopefully, I'll be able to get you guys a report actually created and pushed up there. So you can create a new subscription when I say subscription, everything inside of Azure is a subscription of some sort. So my database is tied to a subscription, my reporting is tied to a subscription, my VMs, if I have any up there, those are all tied to a subscription. So these are not reporting services subscriptions. These are Azure basically payment plans or usage plans that you would then end up paying for. There's three things. You saw those three links, and I'll show you here again in just one second. How to manage reports. You can manage folders, and you can manage data sources. You can also manage the users in there, but you don't actually create the reports right there inside of Azure. You actually create those inside of just reporting services on your local computer, or even a report builder on your local computer. And both of those links are, like I said, available right there inside the Azure Market, or inside the Azure portal. So all those reports are created outside of Azure and then either uploaded, saved, or downloaded from Azure. And then you do have some other very limited options. So there's the reason why I mentioned that there's limited options with reporting services up there in Azure is you don't get the option to do subscriptions. Reports are something new that was in the 2012 release of reporting services, but only for SharePoint. So you don't get subscriptions, you don't get alerts. So you basically just get the report viewer is what it comes down to inside of the Azure portal there. You can go and take your reports and embed them into web pages. So there's some really good information out there on MSDN about that. If you're curious about that, let me know and I can get you the link for some of the material that they have out there. Just a little bit of .NET code to embed those into web pages, but it is possible, and it seems to be pretty easy if you're a .NET guy. Okay. So let's hop back over here and see if Azure is going to comply with me today. So you'll notice again that I don't have any reports inside my report server. And over here, I've got some options to do a couple of different things. So I can create a folder inside of here and call this my webinar. I can save that. It's going to just come in here. It's going to create a folder. If I do add here, I can upload a report. So if I have an existing report on my workstation here, I can add that one in, or I can create a new data source. So if I do create data source, this is pretty key here, that I don't get any options to switch all the database and change all this connection string. So whenever I create a new data source inside of my Azure reporting here, I'm actually creating a data source that connects to one of my Azure databases. So I'll call this my Azure database. And then again, you get the drop down here that has a list of each one of my Azure databases that are available to my subscription. You do have the option inside your Azure databases and inside that management utility there, you can tell it that you don't want your database to be visible inside of your other Azure subscriptions. So if I don't want my database to be able, if I have some specific data in there that needs to be locked down that only certain people have access to, and I don't want my other services in here, so maybe I don't want to be able to access it through the virtual machines or allow my storage to be able to see all that kind of stuff, you can have that so it doesn't actually show up in this drop-down list. Okay, I'm going to click Next here, and I'm going to go ahead and provide it some credentials. So my user ID here and my password. And I'm going to just click Complete. And then it's going to create my my connection over to my Azure database here for me. So once that gets done creating here, it should just take a second. Okay, get this thing refreshed. Oops. Go over here to my Azure reporting items. And for some reason my data source went away. Not real sure why that one went away. Let me see if I can get that created here real quick one more time. Okay, so we'll let that create. There it goes. It says it created successfully. Not sure why it didn't, why it wasn't working there a second ago, but I do have some options here. If I click on Edit, while I have that data source selected there, I can come over here and I can change the credentials if I needed to on this other page. I can also manage the permissions. So I mentioned that you can create different roles and different users and everything inside of here. So I can, much like you can inside your normal on-prem reporting services, I can either allow this to inherit the permissions, or I can assign the permissions specifically to individual objects inside of here. So that's really easy to create these data sources right inside of Azure. So again, like I said, you don't get the option to create reports inside of here. You only get to upload reports or create data sources and create new folders. So what we're going to do here is launch our report builder. So I've got Report Builder 3 already installed on my computer, and we're going to hopefully build a report here, see if it'll maybe let me connect through this instead of through Management Studio there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to start over here with a blank report. And I'm going to right click here and say Add Data Source. So what I can do here is I can browse, and this will actually bring me up to my Azure portal here. So notice that this is the same URL that I've got over here for my report server, and I can refresh this here now and see the directory that has all my webinar data. Here's my data source. So luckily this is actually letting me connect to some of this stuff. So I can actually pull in and use an existing connection that I've already created on Azure, or I can just create a new embedded connection inside of my report here. So I'm going to see if this will let me build my Azure connection here. This is the same way that you would do it inside of Management Studio if we were able to get inside of there. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to pull this URL. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste that into my server name. Type in my username and password, and then the name of my database is Azure Database. And let's see if it'll let me test that connection here. If not, we'll just hopefully use that one that it allows me to pull in from inside of my Azure Market or Azure portal that I already created. So this would be normally how you would connect to it. As you saw there, for some reason it's not working there very well for me today. If I put 1433 in here, put the port on, see if that works for me. Otherwise, we'll just pull in that one that we've already got created there. So again, this is how easy it is to connect, very much like you would normally connect to a SQL Server inside of Management Studio there. So that's not going to work for us. So let's see if we can just use one of these existing ones. So we'll go ahead and browse. Again, it's going to look inside of that same report server that we've already established the connection to here, and I can pull in any data source that I've got created. So I saw there was a question there about the price. Is this free? You get a 3-month free trial. You can sign up for a 3-month free trial. After that, there's pricing options online for your reporting services instance inside the Azure website. Okay, so let's see if we can test this connection here. Connected and created successfully. So we'll go ahead and choose that one that's out there already on my Azure portal. I should probably name something a little bit better than Data Source 1. My really neat Azure connection. And then we're just going to create a normal new data set. So this is very much like we would do it inside of reporting services on any other day. And we can come over here to our query designer, get prompted for my credentials here. I'm going to say save the password with my connection. And then we're just going to build a new data set here into our report, and then we'll actually push this right back out to our reporting services instance inside of Azure. So I'm creating this report now. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to refresh the screen. You'll notice that nothing's changed. I'm still in the middle of creating my report, and of course, right in the middle of when it thinks it's going to be awesome and let me do stuff, I'm not going to be able to connect to my data source. So let's see if we can type something in here. See if it'll refresh the fields here for me. I'm going to assume that this is also not going to work. So if you've ever come to one of my webinars before, please note that this is not usually how they go. They're usually my demos usually work pretty well. Unfortunately, Azure is not playing well with the network here at my client site. So what we're going to try to do is just put a little bit of text on here so we can show you how to upload this. I wish this was working better than it is. Azure is not playing nice today. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can run this report here. It's not even gonna load my report here for me apparently without freezing. So normally, obviously, we would be pulling data in from our Azure database and displaying it here. It's not going to let me do the preview because it can't connect to that data source properly. Let's see if it'll let us save this out here, though. So whenever I went to create my new data source, when we came inside of here and I browsed, I mentioned that it already had the URL for my report server inside of here. So the way that you control that is if we go into our options over here, so click on the little SQL Server icon in the top left and then go to Options. The report server URL just needs to get pasted right inside of here. So the first time that you install Report Builder, if you haven't got it already on your computer and you click on the link inside the Azure portal to download Report Builder and you run that install, the first thing it's going to actually do is it's an optional field, but you can actually give it the report server URL whenever you're doing the installation. So then it'll already have this populated for you. So what we're going to do here is try to save this. So we're going to go to File, Save. Again, you'll notice it goes right to my report server because I've already got that in there. And we'll call this Report Azure SSRS Report. We'll save that one out. I could have put that inside the webinar folder. So if I do File, Save As, and put it over here, save that one. You know, you can have two items be the same name as long as they're not in the same folder. So there's my Azure report that we just saved, and if we go over to my webinar one, here's that Azure one again. So if I click on this report now, there we go. It says that I wish this was working better and that Azure's not playing nice with me today. So that would be how you would normally come in here and just be able to access this stuff. So you remember whenever I typed in that report server URL that it prompted me for my credentials, so it knew what I was able to see. But the more than likely, the way that you're going to want to present this to users is probably by embedding this report inside of some kind of a portal there. Okay. So once we have those both uploaded, we're going to hop back over here to the portal, and I'll show you guys if we drill into this subscription here and I go into my items. There's my Azure report that I just created, as well as the webinar folder with the Azure report here. So the other option that I mentioned that you can upload reports into Azure. So if you create those in your on-prem version, you can upload them right into your Azure market or into your Azure portal. The other option, whenever I have this highlighted, is I can click the download button, and I will click complete. And it's going to actually download a copy of that report. So what I can do here now is I'll create a new reporting services project. Sorry about that. So I'll create this new reporting services project here. I'll cancel the wizard that pops up, and then if I come over to my Solution Explorer here, I can tell it to add an existing report into my data here. So I'll go to my downloads and pull in that report. And now that same report that I built inside of Report Builder is right here inside of reporting services. So I can come in here and I can add more stuff to my report, usually probably data. And then we can come over here to our properties, and much like you would normally do with a reporting services, give it the target URL here. So let's see what I have pasted in there, not that one. So we'll take my report server URL, we'll copy that over here and paste it in to my target server. So just give it the URL for your report server that's provided right there inside the Azure portal, and then we can right-click here and do deploy. Deploy that with our spelling errors and all that I just realized were in there. Prompts you for your credentials so that you can make sure that only people with right access to your portal are able to put reports up there and modify reports and do all that kind of stuff. So now it's going to actually go out just like you would normally do on your local reporting services there, and it can't find my RDS. So delete that connection there and then see if I can get this redeployed. Because I didn't download the data source that was associated with it, it was just giving me an error. I could have just as easily come over here into my portal and gone to my items and downloaded this Azure data source and put it in there as well. So this time, you notice that it succeeded, put everything out there. If we come back over to our report server once again, we'll refresh this. And if we open up the webinar report here, Azure report, and more stuff. So real easy to, if you're very familiar with reporting services already, you'll be very at home with creating these Azure reports. Again, you don't get a whole lot of options up here. You can still do a lot of the same export to Excel or PDF or all that kind of stuff, but you don't have the options to come in here and be able to create new subscriptions and that kind of stuff. You can put parameters inside your reports just like you do inside the on-prem version of reporting services. So you can still use parameters, you can still make cascading parameters, you can still put maps into your reports. All the stuff that's usually there is still going to work for you. It's just a couple of little features here and there that aren't supported inside of Azure at this point. Okay. So like I said, I'll try to get a little demo of this stuff actually recorded for you guys and put out there. I think hopefully we'll be able to actually connect up to the data market here and show you guys some of this stuff. So the Azure Data Market's really cool. There's a bunch of stuff out there that you can pull directly into Power Pivot. It's integrated really, really well. So it uses a subscription model. There's a lot of free data out there on the Azure Data Market as well as some paid data. I was going to show you guys some baseball data because I'm a really big Braves fan. Obviously, if you didn't see the desktop on my computer here. But the Braves lost last night, and that would have ruined my results that I was hoping to show the Braves moving up in the division, not down, so that would have made me sad. So we're going to skip the Braves data, and I'll show you guys a little bit different Azure subscription that was going to integrate with some other Azure data that I don't have in here now. So what we're going to do here is I'll actually show you guys how to connect to the Azure Data Market, do a little bit of exploration of the data there, how to pull it in. And the nice thing about that is because these companies make subscriptions for it, your data is always going to be up to date. So you can actually go out there, depending on the data set, some of them might only be just a dump of data. So there's some census data out there, some like GDP data, which we're going to look at today from the year 2000, I think 97 up through 2011 or something like that. So there's some data that's out there that's static, and there's other data that's like during baseball season. There's actually a Major League Baseball. I think it's pitch by pitch. I know they do game by game, so you can get real live data out of some of these as well. The USGS, the Geological Survey, they post all kinds of weather data and all kinds of different stuff out there that you can pull in and combine with your data that you have. Maybe that you don't want to be able to, maybe that you don't have the resources to maintain, or maybe that you don't want to maintain. So you can combine that data that somebody else has taken the initiative to put together and combine it with your data inside of your organization. So if we come over here to Excel, I'm going to open up Excel. I'm just going to create a new blank workbook here, and I'm going to open the Power Pivot tab and go to the Manage Data Model. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the data modeling aspect of this. That's something that you guys can, we've got plenty of webinars out there about how to do data modeling inside of Power Pivot here. But if you go to From Other Data Sources here, we've got the From Windows Azure Marketplace. So if I click on that, it's going to connect out to the Azure Marketplace. Like I said, there's a bunch of free and paid data out here, so we can come over here and we can search baseball if you're a big baseball fan. So we've got the MLB year-to-date stats as well as the game-by-game. So at the end of each day, you could go out here and download the game-by-game stats and keep your fantasy team up to date. Make sure you get the right players in there. If we come over here, like I said, we can look at the government data. There's all kinds of GDP. So some of this stuff, if you click on any of these links here, it'll give you some more information. Go ahead and log into here. I'll log into my Azure account, and you'll see that we can actually come in and we can do some filtering of the data as well. So this actually has, I believe, the country and the state. So if I filter this down to just Florida, there's all my Florida data. So we can do a little bit of data modification in here as well. So if I come back over here, so what we're going to do is we're going to pull in this GDP per capita by state. So I can select this one. And then again, like I said, you can filter. If there's more than one table in the data set, you'll have more than one checkbox down here at the bottom. So you only have to check off the tables that you want to bring in. But maybe today we only want to bring in the entire country, so the United States level. So we'll filter that data down. Notice that it's now only 15 rows of data. If I clear that filter off of here, it's 900 rows of data. So we'll keep it just the United States. We'll filter that down to just those 15 rows. And then down here on the bottom right, we'll just say select query. Okay. So this is a little bit more familiar screen for people who have done some Power Pivot work in the past. All you have to do here at this point is click Next, give it some kind of a name, and then we'll click Finish. And it's going to import those rows. It's just going to import those 15 rows in this case. We'll click on Close, and you'll notice that it automatically populates this little table over here. So I can go into my existing connections and make some modifications by editing that there. I can schedule my data refresh on that once I push this out to a SharePoint environment. It would probably not be all that intelligent to do data refresh on this, since the title of this particular data feed was from 1997 to 2011. I doubt they're going to be going back and updating the year 2011 data anymore. But like I said, if it is something that has more frequent updates, maybe the baseball stats there, or something more likely that you would probably use would possibly be the weather information, depending on the type of business that you have. The cool thing about this now, though, is I can just click on Create Pivot Table. If I had another table of data inside of here, I could create relationships between these two, but now I can just do Create Pivot Table and come over here, and I can see my GDP by area. I've only got the United States in here, so I can toss the year on there. Oops. Not some of year. So there's my GDP in the United States by year. So I can come over here and I can actually change this to be a decimal. I can make it a dollar format in English US dollars. The 2013 version of Power Pivot automatically updates all this for you. You don't even have to go in here and click refresh like you did in the 2010 version. We can do all kinds of stuff. We can come over here and format this with some data bars so you can see which years actually have the most data, or have the most the highest per capita GDP in the United States. So it looks like for this particular data set, the year 2007 was the peak of the economy for us, and then the number started to go down and has since come back up just a little bit. So really need to be able to come in here and combine this. It's funny, I was actually, like I'll put the demo online for you guys on my blog, but I was actually running through this last night at the hotel, and I was combining this GDP data with the sales data from the Adventureworks data set. And if you look at the Adventureworks data set and you look at the sales amount by year, it's interesting because without even planning it, between 2005 and 2008, the Adventureworks data set there, the amount of money that was spent in that time frame, the amount of products that were ordered, actually followed the same time frame, or the same distribution here as the GDP in the United States for that time period. So the lowest number of sales for that time period was 2005. The next highest was the year 2008, and then 2006 and 2007. So it actually lines up really nicely with the actual GDP data. So like I said, the whole point of this is there's the whole Azure data market out there for you guys to be able to go and pull in all kinds of different data and see how it relates and how you can supplement your existing data sets inside of your environments. Now, it's not going to be the place where you go to get every piece of data to do all your analytics, but some of the data out there is a really nice way to supplement something that you might have a need for inside of your environment there. So just to kind of give you guys a quick recap here, I did notice there was one question there in the chat box that says, is it possible to build a cube on Azure? So the answer there is absolutely, yes, you can. The challenge that you're going to run into, just like integration services, there is no version of analysis services that is inside of Azure at this particular point in time. That's something that could very easily change, but currently there is no version of analysis services in there. So it would be the same way to connect to it, just like you saw I was attempting to do there inside of SSIS. You just give it the Azure Database URL, use your username and password, and then insert the database name. You could just as easily have put a dimensional model up there and built a cube right off of that. It's also the same methodology for importing data into Power Pivot from your Azure connection. So you just use it just like a normal OLEDB connection, and just put the URL as well as your password inside of there. So the key thing to keep in mind about that is the fact that you're going to end up having to pay potentially to pull the data out of Azure to put it into your analysis services cube. So your SSIS packages will not run in Azure. They'll only run on your local machine. So until they actually build integration services into Azure, you're going to have to run all of your SSIS on-prem, or the other option there would be to put a VM in Azure and have your SSIS packages run on that VM inside of Azure. I see a question here that says, how much of a performance can we expect from Azure compared with SQL Server 2012? So that's one of those situations where if you're running the queries all inside of the cloud, so if your data is stored inside of an Azure database and you're running your reports off of the Azure database inside of Azure, so for instance, if you're doing from an Azure database to Azure SQL Reporting, then your query performance would probably be, depending on the resources that you've opted to pay for, could be very comparable to what you would see on your on-prem version of SQL. That being said, though, if I've got a reporting services report on my laptop here and I want to connect up to a database that's inside of the cloud, I'm going to have to pull all the data for that report over the wire down onto my laptop. So you could see a little bit of a performance hit there depending on the size of the data. So it really depends on those two things, where the report is sourced from and the resources that you've opted to pay for on that SQL database. So there's my contact information. I think that's most of the questions. Let me scroll through here real quick. Like I said, feel free to shoot me an email. I apologize that some of the demos didn't work on the network. They were definitely working when I was running through them again last night. I saw there was a question in here earlier that says, does SQL Azure have underlying transaction log and data files? Are they stored on-prem or in the cloud? So there are, it is just SQL Server. It's just in the cloud. You just don't have to manage any of that stuff. So all the transaction logs and all that kind of stuff, they're all managed by Microsoft inside the Azure Data Center. So you don't have to worry about that. Those are all stored in Azure. You don't store those on-prem. There's also a question follow-up on that says, can you transfer a local SQL Server data file and attach it to an Azure database? I don't believe that you can actually reattach the data in there, but I believe there is a migration tool, and I think actually that's going to be one of the topics that I'd have to look at his topic again, but Patrick LeBlanc is going to be doing an Azure database webinar here in a couple of weeks, and I think he's actually going to talk about how to sync the data between an on-prem and an Azure database. So that would be one of the options there, but I don't believe that you can just detach it and restore it up in the cloud. There are some import options, but I'd have to take a look at that and see how extensible those are for you guys. And then there's a final question, it looks like, in here that says, do our clients, can they access the cloud for the reports? So that report server URL that I showed you guys, whenever you open that up the first time, it will ask you for your credentials. So if you, obviously make usernames and passwords for each one of your users that are going to be accessing the reports, and you can control it in that manner and give them that report server URL. But more than likely, that's not a very friendly UI. It's not good for management or anything. So you would probably want to build something a little bit better, a little better UI on top of that you would give them access to. Like I said, I'll shoot you an email with the MSDN link for embedding some of those items inside of some .NET applications, so that you can hopefully try to extend some of that yourself. So, alrighty, guys, that was all I had for today. Again, I apologize that some of those demos didn't work out the way that I obviously had planned them to, but I will either record a video or do some step-by-steps with screenshots sometime over the next week or so while I'm traveling here, when I have some extra time in the evenings, and make sure that I get some of that content out there for you guys, since we weren't able to take a look at all of that today. Because there is actually some really neat integration stuff, and the process really isn't all that difficult to actually get reports up and running inside of Azure. It's actually a very easy thing to be able to connect to and get that working inside your environment there.